All right, welcome back. You're watching the midweek edition of Business Morning on Channels Television. Bosun Mofai, my co-anchor, of course, the business news editor, is still here with me in the studio. But, of course, we're crossing over to our other studio where we take you through the Nigerian energy market. And on tap today is an NLNG success story. I like Bosun like to say.
The golden geese. The golden geese.
The golden geese at this time.
The golden geese, yes. The geese that lay the golden egg. That's what we're talking about next. We'll talk about that in a bit. The state government, 36 state governments and the Federal Capital Territory are sharing for almost 500 billion naira. That's about $1.8 billion from this company, largely unknown. But how much of this company do you know? Do even some of the state government officials really know who's providing the lunch that we are now having that President Buhari has put on the table? Thank you very much, NLG, for saving the country, but we will come to that story in a bit. Let's talk about what you see behind me, where we're starting with the stock prices of some of the big oil retailers and oil producers that we have on our market, quite a sprinkle of them. Total, okay, these folks seem to like Total PLC. Let's start from the Total price. 151 was the closing yesterday, 3.82% on 121,000 units. Seplat, oil producing an exploration company, finishing 336, flat on that unit, 10,698. Look at 40 oil, the only gainer in that segment on Tuesday, ramping up 3.13%, but that was not strong enough to lift that sector on the upside. Significant figure, 622,000. Mobile was flat at 148. Now, if you look at MRS, flat as usual, very insignificant figure there in terms of volume, 609, less than 1,000. And of course, Oando around 1505. Oando shared 4.08% yesterday on the back of about 3 million ordinary shares. That's some figures there for you to chew. Now you find corn oil, the laggard, one of the laggards in that sector, not in terms of price, mind you, 40.85, but that's a figure which we keep finding out what's the issue with a corn oil there remaining significantly dormant over a number of sessions. Now, this is a snapshot of what that sector looks like if you're just joining the show. Price to earnings around 8.5 now because of 0.3 decline yesterday. Year to date, that's about 8.3%, still tracking the overall market negative index return for the year, about 6.7%. That gap is gradually closing between the oil and gas index and the broader market, what you call the composite index, or the dividend yield are largely unchanged. Now let's talk about what Harriet talked about, and Dolapo Oni, the head of energy research at EcoBank Development Corporation, will join us for this conversation in about a minute from now. But let me prepare you for what you're about to see. Now, we are talking about 413 billion naira cash. That's about $1.8 billion that the NLNG, Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas, paid as dividend to the Nigerian government. Now, this company was set up in 1989. The business was to tap gas resources. So you have liquefied natural gas, and we also have the natural gas liquid. So NLNG produces the LNG and the NGLs. The natural gas liquid is part of what you use as LPGs for cooking. The bailout, this is what you see. Now, this is the ownership. Nigerian government, through the NNPC, owns about 49%. Shell is the second largest shareholder, 25.6%. Total owns about, sorry guys, okay, thank you very much, 15%, while ENI owns about 10.4%. So Nigeria is the largest shareholder, about half of liquefied natural gas. We own the natural resource anyway. Okay, let's move on. Now, if you look at the what this company has done over the past few years, LNG has built 6 gas trains. The 7th one is under construction. When that is completed, the NLNG will be able to ramp up total gas production annually for Nigeria at about 30 million, or around 22 million metric tons per annum of LNG. That's exports. Nigeria is the 6th largest gas exporter worldwide. We're coming slightly behind Qatar and Singapore and the rest. Then you have this company consistently paying about $1 billion monthly to the Nigerian government. Now, let me read these figures for you, and this is not any rocket science, and you get that from the website of the NLNG. This company, NLNG, has paid $18 billion on gas purchases from oil-producing companies, of which the Nigerian government owns 55 and 60%. Overall earnings from NLNG now over 70% that the Nigerian government has earned. That's comprising, listen, 49% dividend and 30% company tax, company income tax. In 2013, this company paid 200 billion naira to the Nigerian government as tax. That's the highest that any company ever pays the Nigerian government since independence in 1960. Let's bring in Dolapo Oni from EcoBank. He's head of energy research. Dolapo, thank you very much for joining this conversation.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure you're listening to this conversation. Talk to us about this, the geese that lays the golden egg.
Well, I think the NLNG is a good example of how oil and gas can really contribute to your economy if it's very well structured. I mean, I listened to all the data you rolled out, but I think one aspect that also often gets overlooked is NLNG's contribution to local content. Just last year alone, in December, for instance, for the 6 trains that will be used for the Train 7 project, most of the ships are currently being built in South Korea, but all the painting, all the various fittings, and so many other things that are locally produced here in Nigeria were actually exported from Nigeria to South Korea for those ships. And that was about $10 million worth of products from Nigerian companies, of Nigerian products exported to South Korea. They could have been sourced in South Korea, but then as part of local content development, again, don't forget, Train 7 in itself is a project that is going to create about 18,000 construction jobs and also, I mean, create a lot of revenue for local contractors. So I think NLNG is one of the major success stories.
Dolapo, if you look at that story, thank you very much for bringing that into the conversation. As we speak, about 600 Nigerians, according to NLNG, will be trained to be part of this shipbuilding, or what you called gas shipbuilding project. This is something, and we spoke yesterday, we had an after broadcast conversation with one of Nigeria's economists, and he was telling us at this private meeting that the NLNG represents a good example of how Nigeria should proceed to restructure the golden boy of that sector, the NNPC. But isn't it very curious to you, as an energy analyst, Dolapo, that NLNG is bailing out the Nigerian government at this very crucial time, while the big brother, the NNPC, couldn't do that? Now we have to look up to the cousin.
Yeah, you see, I think, again, it boils down to that issue of structure and also limits to powers and all sorts. I think if the NNPC were given the same leeway and or perhaps given the same similar structure to run from a purely commercial perspective, devoid of all the regulatory functions and bypassing of overlapping of functions that often creates opportunities either for abuse of powers or opportunities. The NNPC could also and should in fact deliver a lot more value than even than the NLNG. Because look at it in comparison, oil exports that we export in Nigeria, I mean, far outweigh what the NLNG will do in a year. The NLNG in the last 15 years has exported over $85 billion worth of gas from Nigeria, 15 years. But if you look at the oil sector, the amount for the volume of oil we export in the country, that's possibly about a year or a year and a half of oil exports from Nigeria alone. So the NNPC technically should actually contribute a lot more value, but I think it's a structural issue.
Okay, now if we look at how this has been a success story for Nigeria, the NLNG that is, do you think the NLNG, therefore, going back to the earlier part of your conversation or your reaction here, that we should use the NLNG as a model of doing business in terms of running a parastatal, so to speak? Well, if you put it that way, the NLNG is a bit of a parastatal. It has a board. Yeah. Even though on this board you have other shareholders, Shell, ENI, Total. Then we bring our own Nigerians there. Babs Omotowa is there with another Nigerian as the chairman. Do you think we should just use this as a template for running things moving forward in the oil and gas sector?
Yeah, I totally agree with that because, I mean, it's tested and it has worked very well, and it's delivering the revenues we want. I mean, like you also mentioned, it's literally bailing out several states at the time right now where we need that revenue. And it's a model that's used in several other countries around the world. I mean, it may be a bit fast-stretched, but I always like to point to Norway, and you look at some of the parastatals they have there. Like there's a company called Gasco that manages all the gas infrastructure as well. It's partly owned by the state and then by the oil companies present in the country, some of the oil companies, and it pays dividends back to the government. The state oil company itself, I mean, funds goes straight into oil production, operates more as a commercial operator than a regulator. There's a separate regulatory division. So those kind of structures allow for, you know, functions for the government to actually focus its agencies on key areas and then avoid overlapping of functions that often gives room to issues like we have. I think the structure that can work, we can make NMPC run in a similar structure as well.
Okay, Dolapo, our last question for you. In terms of headline stories about corruption, stealing petrol, or stealing crude and whatever, you've never heard any of this story, of these stories from the gas sector. So from your perspective, why is this so? NLNG hasn't been involved in whether any money is missing or whatever, even though sources say we haven't really seen on the country's balance sheet where NLNG's dividend and company taxes has gone since 1989. Talk to us a little bit about this.
Well, you see, NLNG has its own issues actually, and don't forget that, I mean, just 2 years ago, in 2013, there was a major tax issue between NLNG and NIMASA, in which there was a blockade, and NLNG lost a significant amount of export revenues that year because they literally lost, they were not able to operate for about 2-3 months, and they couldn't send a lot of cargoes they were due for that period, so they lost a lot of revenue. There's been issues also with some of the gas pipelines feeding them. That also has sort of hindered their ability to meet some of their targets. Like last year, they were meant to export, the target for last year was to export about 325 cargoes, but they only managed to do about 315. Previous year before that, they only did about 260. And so we've not really maxed out full capacity of 22 million metric tons on the NLNG, but we are fast approaching that, and we could actually get there. But they've had less issues compared to what we've had on the oil side of things. And I think it still boils down to the structure for me. It's still a case of the fact that if a business is set up to run commercially, and you have independent, you have all the oil companies that are supplying the feed gas also on the board. It gives a little more transparency or accountability in terms of how the business is run. And then again, the government is also just a 49% shareholder, so not entirely a controlling party, but large enough to be the big boy on the board. So okay, it's a good structure.
Okay, thank you very much, Dolapo. We've got to end it at that. Thank you very much for giving us those perspectives on Nigeria's golden geese bailing us out at this hour. You're watching Business Morning. Harriet, back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Bosin. Of course, interesting developments there coming from the NLNG. Who would have thought that that particular geese, as you like to call it, was going to be the biggest. Yes, it was going to be the anchor for this particular situation, the savior for this particular situation, bailing out the states.
Yes, it's the one doing the lunchtime. Thank you, guys.
But we're still going to be talking a lot more about this bailout. Coming up after the break, I'll be joined from our Abuja studio by a development economist, Odilim Enweragba, as we look at the 713.7 billion naira federal government bailout. Please stay with us.